Karin's fingers wrapped around the cold metal scissors hidden deep in her coat pocket. 22 years old, and she was ready to die. Not from enemy bullets, not from starvation, but by her own hand. Because that's what they told her to do. That's what every German girl learned in those final, desperate months of the war. Death before dishonesty. Death before surrender. Death before the Americans. Huddled in that freezing concrete tomb with 50 other women, Karin had made her choice. When those monsters in American uniforms broke through the bunker door, she would drive those scissors straight into her own heart. But then the door exploded open. Smoke filled the room. Heavy boots echoed on concrete, and there he stood, the enemy, the monster, the man she was supposed to fear more than death itself. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't shout. He didn't even smile, that cruel smile she'd been warned about. Instead, he looked at her shivering body, took off his own heavy wool coat, warm, thick, alive with his body heat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Just like that, everything Karin thought she knew about the world shattered. This is her story, the story of how kindness became the most dangerous weapon of all. If this story moves you, if you want to hear more untold stories from history that challenge everything we thought we knew, please hit that subscribe button. These stories deserve to be remembered, and your support helps keep them alive. December 1944. If hell had a waiting room, it looked exactly like that bunker near the Belgian border. 52 women. Nurses, every single one of them. Young, exhausted, abandoned. 10 days they'd been locked inside that concrete grave. 10 days without food. 10 days with only a trickle of freezing water from a broken pipe. 10 days listening to the earth shake as American artillery pounded everything above them into dust. Their own officers, those proud SS men who had promised to protect German womanhood, who had sworn oaths to the fatherland, had run away like cowards in the night. Locked the bunker door from the outside, left them there to rot, or worse. Karin sat in the corner, her back against the damp wall, feeling the cold seep through her thin nurse's uniform and into her very bones. Around her, women whispered prayers. Some cried silently. Others had stopped moving altogether, their eyes empty and staring at nothing. She pulled the surgical scissors from her pocket, stolen from the medical kit weeks ago when she first understood how this war would end. The metal felt heavy, final. "It's the only way," Greta whispered beside her. Greta, who was only 19. Greta, who used to sing while changing bandages. Greta, who hadn't smiled in 3 months. "What they'll do to us," Greta's voice cracked. "My brother wrote letters from the Eastern Front before he died. He told me what the Russians did to German nurses they captured. The Americans will be the same, maybe worse." Every woman in that bunker believed it. They'd been told the stories 1,000 times. American soldiers were savages who showed no mercy to women. Prison camps where German girls were starved, beaten, humiliated. Worse things. Things too terrible to speak aloud. "Better dead than dishonored," their commanding officer had said just before he disappeared into the darkness. "Remember, you are German women. You know your duty." So Karin gripped those scissors and waited for the door to break, waited for the monsters to pour in. Waited for the moment when she would have to be brave enough to push sharp metal into her own flesh. The explosions got louder, closer. The walls shook so hard that dust rained from the ceiling like snow. Then silence, terrible heavy silence, footsteps, heavy boots on concrete stairs. Men's voices speaking that harsh American English. "They're here," someone whispered. 52 women held their breath. Karin's hand tightened around the scissors. "This is it, be brave. Remember who you are. Remember what they'll do to you if you don't." The bunker door exploded inward, blown off its hinges by American explosives. Smoke poured into the room like a living thing, choking and blinding. Through the gray fog, shadows moved. Big shadows, armed shadows. Karin raised the scissors to her chest. Found the spot just like the medical training taught her. One quick thrust upward between the ribs straight into the heart. It would be fast, probably painless. She closed her eyes. Mother, forgive me. Father, I tried to be brave. I tried to, holy hell. The American voice cut through the smoke. Not angry, not cruel, shocked. Karin's eyes snapped open. A soldier stood in the doorway, his rifle lowered, staring at the scene before him. 52 half-starved women in filthy uniforms, huddled in the darkness like terrified animals. His face, she could see it clearly now as the smoke cleared, looked young, maybe 25, and he looked horrified, but not at them, for them. Jesus Christ, another soldier said, stepping up beside the first. They locked their own people in here. Their own women. The first soldier, the one with the kind face, lowered his rifle completely and held up both hands. It's okay, he said in slow, careful English. You're safe now, you're safe. Safe. Karin didn't understand. Where were the raised guns? Where were the cruel smiles? Where was the violence she'd been promised? The soldier took a step forward and every woman in the bunker flinched backward. He stopped immediately, his hands still raised. I'm not going to hurt you, he said softly. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the filth, the exhaustion, the terror. Then his gaze landed on Karin. She must have looked like death itself, 10 days without proper food or sleep. Her uniform was stained with mud and old blood from treating wounded soldiers weeks ago. Her hair hung in greasy strings around her face, and she was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered. The soldier saw all of this in an instant, and then he did something that made no sense at all. He took off his coat. His heavy wool coat, the one that kept him warm in the freezing December cold, the one that probably saved his life a dozen times. He took it off, walked slowly toward Karin, giving her every chance to run, to scream, to resist, and gently, so gently, wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth hit her like a physical blow. It smelled like soap and tobacco and life. It was heavy and real and warm, so warm. And Karin couldn't understand, couldn't process, couldn't breathe because monsters don't give you their coats. Monsters don't look at you with concerned eyes and ask, "When did you last eat?" Monsters don't wave over their friends and say, "Get me every blanket we've got, and food." These women need food right now. Karin's fingers, still wrapped around the scissors in her pocket, slowly loosened. She didn't stab herself that day. She didn't have to. Because the enemy she'd been taught to fear more than death itself had just committed the most dangerous act of all. He had shown her kindness. And kindness, Karin would soon learn, was the one weapon she had no defense against. Years later, when historians would interview Karin for the archives, she would say that moment changed everything she believed about human nature. The coat became a symbol, not just of warmth, but of the possibility that even in the darkest times, compassion could break through the walls of propaganda and hate. The trucks bounced along dirt roads for what felt like forever. Karin sat in the back with 20 other women, wrapped in American blankets, eating American rations, hard crackers and canned meat that tasted better than anything she'd eaten in months. Nobody spoke. They were too terrified of what came next. Through the gaps in the canvas cover, Karin caught glimpses of the countryside rolling past. They'd crossed the ocean on a ship. That much she understood from the endless days of seasickness and the sound of waves. But where were they being taken? Greta leaned close and whispered, "Labor camps in the desert. They'll work us to death in factories." Another woman shook her head. "No, interrogation centers. They'll torture us for information about the Reich." A third woman, older than the rest, said quietly, "It doesn't matter where. We're German. We're women. We're prisoners. The end will be the same." The truck finally stopped. Guards opened the back and bright Alabama sunlight poured in, so bright after months in the darkness that Karin had to shield her eyes. "Everyone out," an American voice barked. "Welcome to Camp Aliceville." Karin climbed down, her legs shaky, and then she stopped. froze completely. This was the labor camp. This was the prison of horrors they'd been warned about. Green grass stretched in every direction, so green it hurt to look at after months of gray concrete and brown mud. Trees, actual living trees, swayed in a warm breeze. The sky was blue, impossibly blue, without a single bomber or cloud of smoke in sight. Birds sang. Birds. When was the last time Karin had heard birds? "Move along," a guard said, but not unkindly. "Processing is this way." They were herded into a long building. Inside, American nurses in clean white uniforms waited with clipboards and tired smiles. One of them, a woman with red hair and freckles, looked at Karin and winced. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "Let's get you cleaned up, not interrogated, not beaten, not thrown into a cell, cleaned up." The nurse led Karin down a hallway to a large room with rows of shower stalls. White tile gleamed under electric lights. The air smelled like soap and steam. "Uniforms off," the nurse said, pointing to benches lined with folded towels. "You'll get clean clothes after." Karin's hands trembled as she unbuttoned her filthy nurse's uniform. Around her, other German women did the same, all of them moving like sleepwalkers, unable to believe what was happening. Greta grabbed Karin's arm, her fingernails digging in hard enough to hurt. "The showers," Greta whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Karin, the showers." And suddenly Karin understood why her heart was pounding so hard. The rumors from the East. The whispered stories that no one wanted to believe but everyone feared. Showers that didn't spray water. Showers that sprayed something else. Something that killed you slowly while you screamed. "They're going to gas us," Greta breathed. "This is how it ends. They bring us to this beautiful place, make us think we're safe, and then, 'Everyone in,'" the American nurse called cheerfully. "Water's hot." 52 German women stood frozen, naked and terrified, staring at those shower heads like they were gun barrels. Karin's whole body shook. This was it. This was the trap. They'd been too kind, too gentle, and now the showers turned on. Water, hot water, real water, not gas, not poison, just water. It hit Karin's skin, so hot it almost burned, and she couldn't help it. She started crying. Great gulping sobs that shook her entire body as months of filth and fear and exhaustion washed away down the drain. Around her, other women cried too. Some laughed. Some did both at the same time, making sounds that were half joy and half breakdown. The American nurse walked between the stalls, handing out bars of soap. Not the harsh lye soap the German army used, real soap that smelled like lavender and roses. "Take your time," the nurse said gently. "You're safe here, I promise." Safe, that word again. Karin scrubbed her skin until it turned pink, washed her hair 3 times until the water ran clear, stood under the spray until her tears mixed with the water, and she couldn't tell them apart anymore. When she finally stepped out, wrapped in a thick white towel that was softer than any blanket she'd ever owned, she caught her reflection in a fogged mirror. She looked human again. Clean clothes waited on the benches, not uniforms, not prison rags. Simple cotton dresses in different colors, with underwear and socks and actual shoes that fit. Greta stood beside her, dressed in a blue cotton dress, looking younger than her 19 years. She touched the fabric like she didn't quite believe it was real. "I don't understand," Greta whispered. "Why are they being so kind?" Karin had no answer, but the kindness wasn't over, not even close. The American nurses led them to a mess hall, a large building with long tables and that same impossible smell of real food cooking, not the watery soup and moldy bread they'd survived on for months. Actual food. "Sit anywhere," a guard said, gesturing to the empty tables. "Dinner's almost ready." The German women sat in silence, still unable to believe this wasn't some kind of elaborate torture. Maybe the food would be poisoned. Maybe this was all designed to give them hope before they took it away. But then the kitchen doors opened, and American workers carried out trays. Piles of roasted meat, mountains of mashed potatoes swimming in butter and gravy, fresh bread, soft and white, still warm from the oven, green beans, carrots, and cake. Actual cake with white frosting. The American worker set a full tray in front of Karin, a full tray, not scraps, not leftovers. The same food the guards were eating at their own tables across the room. Karin stared at it, her throat tight. At home, in Germany, her mother was probably eating sawdust bread if she was eating at all. Her little sister was starving in the rubble of Hamburg. Her father, if he was even still alive, was chewing on leather boots to survive. And here, in enemy territory in the heart of the monster's land, they were giving her a feast. "Eat up," an American nurse said, passing by with a smile. "You girls need your strength back." Karin picked up her fork. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. She took a bite of the mashed potatoes and started crying again. Not because it tasted bad, because it tasted good, because it was warm and rich and more food than she'd seen in 6 months. Because while her family starved, her enemies were feeding her like she mattered. The guilt nearly choked her, but she kept eating because she was so hungry. And because some part of her, deep down, was starting to realize something terrifying. If the Americans weren't the monsters she'd been promised, if they fed their prisoners and gave them hot showers and clean beds, if they treated captured German nurses with more kindness than Germany treated its own soldiers, then what did that say about everything she'd fought for? That night, Karin lay in an actual bed with clean sheets and a soft pillow, in a barracks that had heat and electric lights and windows that looked out onto that impossibly green grass. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the other women breathe in the darkness. And for the first time since the war began, she allowed herself to think a thought that would have been treason just days ago. Maybe we were the monsters all along. If you're finding these stories powerful, if they're making you think differently about history and humanity, please like this video. It helps more people discover these forgotten stories of courage and compassion. 3 days after arriving at Camp Aliceville, Karin received her assignment. "You're a trained nurse, correct?" asked the American officer reviewing her papers. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Yes, sir," Karin answered in her broken English, keeping her eyes down like she'd been taught. "Good. We need help in the camp hospital. You'll work under Dr. Sullivan. Report there tomorrow morning at 0600. Karin's stomach dropped. The hospital, where she would have to touch Americans, treat Americans, save American lives. Everything she'd been taught said this was wrong. Betrayal, treason. German nurses were supposed to serve German soldiers, not the enemy. What would her father say? What would her commanding officers say? What would she say to herself when she looked in the mirror? But orders were orders, even from your captors. The next morning, Karin walked across the camp to the hospital building. Her new shoes, actual shoes, not the falling-apart boots she'd worn for months, crunching on the gravel path. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The hospital was clean, impossibly clean. White walls, white floors, the sharp smell of antiseptic in the air. Nothing like the field hospital she'd worked in, where blood soaked through thin mattresses and men screamed until their throats gave out. "You must be Karin." A man in a doctor's coat approached, hand extended for a handshake. He was tall, maybe 40, with brown hair going gray at the temples and a warm smile that didn't match anything Karin expected from an American doctor. "I'm Dr. Sullivan," he said. "Welcome to our team." Our team, like she belonged there, like she wasn't the enemy. Karin shook his hand because refusing would be disrespectful, and she'd been taught to respect doctors above all else. His grip was firm but gentle. "Your English is pretty good, doctor," Sullivan said, leading her down the hallway. "That'll help. Most of the work is routine, changing bandages, taking temperatures, administering medications." "Think you can handle that?" Karin nodded, not trusting her voice. "Great. Let me show you around. The hospital ward held about 30 beds, most of them occupied by American soldiers recovering from injuries or illness. They looked young, so young, just boys really, 19 or 20 years old with homesick eyes. They looked, Karin realized with a jolt, exactly like the German boys she'd treated on the other side of this war. Scared, in pain, missing their mothers. "We're short-staffed, doctor," Sullivan explained as they walked. "The Army keeps pulling our people for the Pacific Theater, so we're grateful for the help wherever it comes from." He said it so simply. No anger, no suspicion. Just gratitude. For the first few days, Karin kept her head down and her mouth shut. She changed bandages with trembling fingers, took temperatures, helped soldiers who couldn't feed themselves. Every task felt like walking across a frozen lake that might crack at any moment. The American nurses were kind to her, too kind. They showed her where supplies were kept, how Dr. Sullivan liked things organized, which patients needed extra attention. They shared their lunch with her, asked about her family back in Germany with genuine sympathy in their eyes. It made everything worse. Being hated would have been easier. Being treated like the enemy would have made sense, but being treated like a colleague, like a friend. That was the cruelest thing they could have done. The breaking point came on her 7th day. It was a busy morning. Several new patients had arrived overnight, sick with fever, and the ward was chaos. Dr. Sullivan moved between beds like a man conducting an orchestra, calm and focused, calling out orders while Karin and 2 American nurses scrambled to keep up. "Karin," Dr. Sullivan called. "I need penicillin for bed 12. Top shelf, 3rd cabinet, penicillin. The miracle drug that could save lives with a single injection, liquid gold in wartime." Karin rushed to the supply cabinet, her hands shaking worse than ever because she was tired and overwhelmed and terrified of making a mistake. She reached for the shelf too fast, too careless, and her fingers slipped. The vial fell. Time seemed to slow down as Karin watched it tumble through the air, the precious amber liquid visible through the glass. It shattered on the tile floor, glass and penicillin spreading in a puddle at Karin's feet. The entire ward went silent. Karin's heart stopped beating. In the German army, wasting medicine, especially something as valuable as penicillin, was sabotage. Immediate punishment. She'd seen nurses beaten for less. Seen doctors shot for deliberately destroying supplies. This was it. This was where the American kindness would end, where they'd finally show their true faces. Karin dropped to her knees on the wet floor. Her hands grabbed at the broken glass, cutting into her palms, blood mixing with the medicine. And she didn't care, she just needed to fix it, needed to show she didn't mean it. "Forgive me," she sobbed in broken English, her voice cracking. "Please, please, I am sorry, I did not mean, I am sorry, please do not," she was begging. Actually begging, waiting for the blow she knew was coming, the punishment, the violence. Warm hands wrapped around hers. Gentle hands. Dr. Sullivan knelt beside her on the floor. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Not "what have you done?" Not "do you know how much that cost?" Not "you stupid girl." Just "are you hurt?" Karin looked up at him through tears, her bleeding hands still full of broken glass. Completely unable to understand. Dr. Sullivan carefully took each piece of glass from her fingers and set them aside. Then he examined her palms, frowning at the cuts. "These need to be cleaned," he said calmly. To one of the American nurses, he added, "Get me the first aid kit, please." Then to Karin, "It's okay. Accidents happen. Accidents happen. In the German army, there were no accidents. Only incompetence, only sabotage, only reasons for punishment. But here, kneeling on this floor with her hands bleeding and the most expensive medicine in the world soaking into her dress, the American doctor was bandaging her wounds. Like she was the patient. Like she mattered more than the medicine. "I am sorry," Karin whispered again, because she didn't know what else to say. Dr. Sullivan finished wrapping her hands and helped her to her feet. His eyes were kind, worried even. "Karin," he said gently, "mistakes happen to everyone. You don't need to be afraid here, okay?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good. Now go wash up and take a break. We've got this covered." Karin walked to the washroom on shaking legs, locked herself in a stall, and cried until she had no tears left. Because she was starting to understand something that made her entire world tilt on its axis. In this place, among the enemy, she was being treated with more humanity than she'd ever experienced in her own uniform. The Americans weren't supposed to be the good guys, but they were acting like it anyway, and Karin didn't know how to live in a world where that was true. In the oral histories collected decades later, Karin would describe this moment as the second shattering of her worldview. The first was the coat. The second was the broken vial. Both taught her the same lesson. Mercy was stronger than fear. Word spread fast in the prisoner barracks. The German nurse works for the Americans now. She treats the enemy like they're her own people. She smiles at them, laughs with them, traitor. Karin heard the whispers everywhere she went, in the mess hall, in the showers. Walking across the compound, eyes followed her, cold and judging, belonging to other German prisoners who still believed in the Reich, still wore their invisible uniforms with pride, still waited for the miracle that would turn this war around. Most of them were men, officers mostly, captured in different battles, brought to Camp Aliceville because it was big enough to hold thousands. They organized themselves just like they had in the army. Ranks, rules, punishments. The Americans called them prisoners. They called themselves the Camp Gestapo. Karin tried to ignore them, kept her head down, did her work in the hospital. Came back to the women's barracks at night and spoke to no one. But ignoring them wouldn't save her. It happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after she'd started working in the hospital. Karin was clearing tables in the mess hall. Prisoners were assigned rotating duties, and tonight was her turn for cleanup. Most people had finished dinner and left, heading back to their barracks before curfew. The mess hall was nearly empty. Nearly. "Well, well." The voice came from behind her, speaking German with a Berlin accent, cold and sharp as a knife. Karin froze, her hands full of dirty dishes. She turned slowly. 3 men stood there, still wearing their German uniforms despite being prisoners. The one in front was a sergeant. She could tell from the way he held himself, straight-backed and arrogant, like he still had authority. His name was Koch. Everyone in the camp knew him. He'd been captured during the Battle of the Bulge, and he spent every day making sure everyone remembered he was still a German officer, still loyal to the Führer, still waiting for victory. "Working late," Koch said, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Or do your American friends pay you extra for overtime?" Karin's heart started pounding. "I'm just cleaning." "It's my assignment." "Your assignment?" Koch stepped closer. The other 2 men spread out, blocking the exits. "Tell me, Fräulein, what are your other assignments? How many American soldiers did you save today? How many of our enemies did you help survive so they can kill more Germans?" "I'm a nurse," Karin said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands shook. "I help anyone who needs it." "That's what nurses do. That's what traitors do." Koch spat the word like poison. "You wear that dress like you've forgotten who you are. Like you've forgotten you're German." "I haven't forgotten anything." "No, then why do I see you smiling at the enemy? Why do I hear you laughing with that American doctor? Why do you sit at their tables and eat their food like you're one of them?" "Because they feed me." The words burst out before Karin could stop them. "Because they treat me like a human being. Because they don't beat me when I make mistakes or lock me in a bunker to die." The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Karin's head snapped to the side, her cheek exploding in pain. She stumbled backward, dropping the dishes with a crash. Koch grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You disgrace your uniform," he hissed. "You disgrace Germany. You disgrace every soldier who died fighting these animals." He raised his fist and a hand caught his wrist mid-swing. "That's enough." The voice was American, deep, calm, dangerous. Karin looked up through tears to see an American guard standing there. A big man, maybe 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and hands like steel traps. She'd seen him around the camp, always quiet, always watching, but she'd never heard him speak before. He held Koch's wrist in an iron grip, and despite Koch being a trained soldier, he couldn't break free. "Let go of her," the guard said. His English was simple, but Koch understood tone just fine. "This is not your concern," Koch said in broken English. "This is German business." The guard didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't negotiate, he just moved. 1 second Koch was gripping Karin's arm. The next, he was stumbling backward 3 feet, shoved by a force that sent him crashing into one of the mess hall tables. The guard stepped between them, a wall of muscle and authority. "She," he said, pointing at Karin without taking his eyes off Koch, "is under my protection." Those words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Under my protection, not just a prisoner. Not just another German girl to be managed and controlled, protected. Koch's face went red with rage. "You have no right. I have every right. This is my camp, my country. My rules." The guard's voice dropped lower. "And in my camp we don't hit women, ever. You understand?" The other 2 German prisoners shifted nervously, suddenly unsure if loyalty to Koch was worth getting on an American guard's bad side. Koch understood the calculation. Understood he was outnumbered and outranked in this place, no matter what his German uniform said. He straightened his jacket with sharp, angry movements. "This isn't over, Fräulein," he said to Karin in German. "You can hide behind Americans now, but someday this war will end. Someday we'll go home. And when we do, everyone will remember who stood with Germany and who betrayed her." He turned and walked out, the other 2 following like angry dogs. The mess hall felt very quiet. Karin stood there, shaking, her cheeks still burning from the slap. She waited for her heart to stop pounding, waited for her hands to stop shaking, waited for the world to make sense again. The American guard turned to look at her. Up close, she could see his face clearly, weathered and scarred, probably in his 30s, with eyes that had seen too much war. "You okay?" he asked. The question broke something inside her. She started crying. Again. She seemed to do that a lot these days. "I do not understand," she said through tears, mixing German and English in her confusion. "Why do you help me? I am German, I am enemy. Why do you care?" The guard pulled out a handkerchief clean, folded neatly, and handed it to her. "My name's Robert," he said. "And I help you because it's the right thing to do, simple as that. But your people, my people got into this war because we believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Everyone. Even the enemy." He smiled just a little. "Especially enemy nurses who are just trying to help people." Karin wiped her eyes with the handkerchief. It smelled like laundry soap in America. "He will come back," she whispered. "Koch, he will try to hurt me again." Robert's expression hardened. "Let him try, I'll be watching." And somehow Karin believed him. She believed that this American soldier, this enemy, would actually protect her from her own countrymen. The irony made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't mention it." Robert picked up the fallen dishes, stacking them neatly on a tray like it was the most natural thing in the world for a guard to clean up after prisoners. "Come on, I'll walk you back to your barracks. Make sure you get there safe." They walked in silence across the darkening compound, and Karin found herself wondering if Germany had soldiers like Robert, men who protected instead of punished, who helped instead of hurt. Would this war have ever happened at all? She was starting to think the answer was no. Christmas Eve 1944, the day that used to mean everything in Karin's world, had become just another reminder of everything she'd lost. No family, no home. No Stalin bread or candlelit church services, or her mother's voice singing still knacked, while snow fell outside the window. Just a prison camp in Alabama where the December weather felt more like autumn and nothing made sense anymore. Karin's shift at the hospital ended at 6 p.m. She'd spent the day helping Dr. Sullivan treat a pneumonia outbreak in the barracks. Ironic that she was saving American lives while her own people died in the rubble of Germany, and she was exhausted. Bone-deep exhausted. Soul-deep exhausted. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. She walked toward the exit, pulling her coat tight against the evening chill. Through the windows, she could see other prisoners gathering in small groups, trying to create some kind of Christmas celebration out of nothing. A few had fashioned decorations from scraps. Others sang German carols quietly, their voices full of longing for a home they might never see again. Karin didn't want to join them, didn't want to pretend this was okay. Didn't want to feel anything at all. Karin, Dr. Sullivan's voice stopped her at the door. She turned, expecting another emergency, another crisis. Another reason to stay busy so she wouldn't have to think. But Dr. Sullivan just stood there in the hallway, still wearing his doctor's coat, looking nervous. That didn't make sense. Dr. Sullivan was never nervous. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Yes, of course." He walked over, hands in his pockets, and for a moment he seemed younger than his 40-something years, almost shy. "So it's Christmas Eve," he said. Karin nodded, not understanding where this was going. "And well, the staff always has a little dinner together. Nothing fancy, just a tradition. To remind ourselves why we're here, what we're fighting for." He paused. "I was wondering if you'd like to join us." Karin blinked. "I what? Dinner with the staff tonight?" Dr. Sullivan smiled. "Unless you have other plans, in a prison camp, on Christmas Eve." "I am a prisoner," Karin said slowly, making sure she understood correctly. "You are asking a German prisoner to eat dinner with American staff. I'm asking a colleague to join us for dinner." Dr. Sullivan's smile widened. "You've worked hard, Karin, helped a lot of people. We'd like you to be there. We'd like you to be there. Not you're allowed to be there, not we'll tolerate you being there. We'd like you to be there." Karin's throat tightened. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes. It's warmer inside than in the barracks and the food's better too." He winked. "Mary's bringing her famous fruitcake. You don't want to miss that." Against all logic, against every reason she had to say no, Karin found herself nodding. "Yes, thank you, yes. Great, 7 o'clock in the staff lounge. See you there." Dr. Sullivan walked back down the hallway, whistling something that sounded like jingle bells, leaving Karin standing alone with her thoughts. What am I doing? At 7 o'clock, Karin stood outside the staff lounge, her hand raised to knock, her courage failing. Through the door she could hear laughter. American voices, warm and happy, celebrating a holiday in the middle of a war. She was the enemy. She didn't belong in there. She should turn around, go back to the barracks. Sit in the darkness with the other German women and try to sleep through this terrible night. But before she could run, the door opened. Mary, one of the American nurses, red-haired and always smiling, stood there with a plate of cookies in her hands. "Karin, perfect timing. Come in, come in." She pulled Karin inside before there was time to protest. The staff lounge had been transformed. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper chains and popcorn strings. Candles burned on every surface, filling the room with warm light. A record player in the corner played Bing Crosby singing White Christmas, and there was food, so much food. Roasted turkey on a big platter, mashed potatoes, gravy, stuffing, cranberry sauce. Sweet potatoes with marshmallows on top, rolls, butter, and desserts, pies and cakes and cookies covering an entire table. It looked like a feast from before the war, before rationing. Before hunger became normal, it looked like home. "Karin," Dr. Sullivan waved from across the room. "Over here." He stood by a long table where other staff members were already seated, nurses, orderlies, even a few guards who'd been invited. An empty chair waited at the table, for her. Karin walked over on shaking legs. Every eye in the room was on her, and she waited for someone to say something, to object, to ask what a German prisoner was doing at their Christmas dinner. But no one did. Instead, Mary pulled out the empty chair. "Sit, honey, you must be starving." Karin sat. The chair was real, the table was real, the food was real. This was happening, doctor. Sullivan stood at the head of the table and raised a glass of water. "Before we eat, I just want to say thank you to everyone here. This year has been difficult. We've lost people we cared about. Seen things we can't forget, but tonight we're together, we're safe, and we're going to celebrate that." He looked directly at Karin, all of us. Everyone raised their glasses. Karin lifted hers with trembling hands. "To peace," Dr. Sullivan said. "May it come soon." "To peace," everyone echoed, and they drank. The food was passed around, not just to the Americans. To Karin, too. Mary handed her the turkey platter. "White meat or dark?" I do not. Try both." Mary piled her plate high with turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, everything. "You need to gain some weight, honey. You're all skin and bones." Karin stared at her plate. It was full, overflowing. More food than she'd seen on a single plate since before the war. She picked up her fork, put a bite of turkey in her mouth, and had to close her eyes because it tasted so good it hurt. "Good, right," Mary said with a knowing smile. "That's my mama's recipe. She mails me the seasoning from Ohio every year." "It is," Karin couldn't find the English words. "It is wonderful. Wait till you try the fruitcake." Around the table, people were laughing, sharing stories, talking about Christmases back home, about families waiting for them, about silly traditions and childhood memories. One of the nurses, a young woman named Betty, pulled out a photograph from her pocket. "This is my son," she said, showing it to the person next to her. "Jimmy, he's 3 now. Haven't seen him in 8 months." The photo got passed around the table. When it reached Karin, Betty handed it over without hesitation. Karin looked at the picture. A little boy with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile, sitting on a tricycle. He looked exactly like her nephew, the one who'd been killed in an air raid on Berlin last year. "He is beautiful," Karin whispered, handing the photo back carefully. Betty smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I'm going to see him again, soon as this war ends. Going to hold him so tight he'll complain." "Do you have family back home?" Betty asked Karin, not accusingly, just asking, like Karin was a person worth knowing about. Karin nodded. "My mother. My sister, maybe my father if he..." She couldn't finish. "I hope they're safe," Betty said simply, and she meant it. Karin had to look away before she started crying again. These people, these Americans, were supposed to hate her, supposed to see her as the enemy, as other, as less than human. But here they were, sharing their food and their Christmas and their family photographs like she was one of them, like she mattered. After dinner, someone put on a different record. Christmas carols filled the room, Silent Night and Oh Holy Night, and songs Karin had grown up singing in German, now sung in English but still carrying the same message. Peace on earth, goodwill to all. Dr. Sullivan sat down next to Karin while others cleaned up or danced or sang along. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. Karin nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. I'm glad you came." "Doctor," Karin said carefully, choosing each English word like stepping on stones across a river, "why do you do this? Why do you treat me like a person?" "Yes." Dr. Sullivan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father was German, came to America in 1910. Changed his name from Schmidt to Sullivan because he was afraid people would hate him when the First War started." Karin looked at him in surprise. "So I grew up knowing that nationality is just an accident of birth, that Germans and Americans aren't different species. We're all just people trying to survive, trying to protect the ones we love, trying to make sense of a world that doesn't always make sense. He smiled sadly. This war won't last forever, Karin. And when it ends, I want to be able to say I treated people with humanity, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Karin felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Again. I am sorry, she whispered. For what? For everything, for this war, for the terrible things my country has done, for Dr. Sullivan put a gentle hand on her shoulder. You didn't start this war, Karin. You're just trying to survive it. That's all any of us are doing. He stood up and offered his hand. Come on. Mary's about to cut the fruitcake, and if you don't get a piece now, Robert will eat the whole thing. Karin took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. That night, sitting in a warm room full of laughter and candlelight, eating fruitcake with people who should have been her enemies, Karin felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe the war would end. Maybe she would see her family again. Maybe the world could be good again. And maybe, just maybe, kindness was stronger than hate after all. Before we continue with the final chapter of Karin's story, if these moments are touching your heart, please subscribe to our channel. These stories of humanity in the darkest times need to be told, and your subscription helps us bring more of them to light. Hit that bell icon so you never miss another story. May 1945. The war was over. Germany had surrendered. Hitler was dead. The Reich was gone, and Karin was going home. Home was a strange word now. What was left of Germany to go home to? The radio reports spoke of cities reduced to rubble, millions dead or missing, starvation, disease, a country that would take generations to rebuild, but it was still home. And Karin needed to know if anyone she loved was still alive. The camp was emptying quickly. Trucks arrived every day to take prisoners to the docks, where ships waited to carry them back across the Atlantic, back to the ruins, back to face whatever future waited in the ashes. Karin stood with her group, 50 German women who'd been at Aliceville for months, waiting for their turn to board. They wore the same dresses they'd been given when they arrived, clean but worn from use. They carried small bags with personal items the Americans had let them keep. It wasn't much. But it was more than Karin had arrived with. The other women whispered nervously. What if there's no food in Germany? What if the Russians got to our cities first? What if there's nothing left at all? Karin didn't have answers. Nobody did. Karin, she turned to see Dr. Sullivan hurrying across the compound, slightly out of breath. He'd been working overtime these past weeks, making sure all the prisoners were healthy enough for the journey home, signing medical papers, saying goodbye to people he'd spent months caring for. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling. I'm glad I caught you, he said, pulling her aside from the group. I wanted to say goodbye properly. Thank you, Karin said, her English much better now after months of practice. For everything, for teaching me, for being kind, she couldn't finish. There were too many things to thank him for. Dr. Sullivan pulled an envelope from his pocket. I wrote you a letter of recommendation, in case you need it. It says you're a skilled nurse and a good person. He pressed it into her hands. Might help if you're looking for work when you get back. Karin stared at the envelope, her throat tight. You did not have to do this. I wanted to, he smiled. You're going to help a lot of people, Karin, I know it. Final boarding, an American officer called. All repatriation candidates to the trucks. The moment had come. Karin shook Dr. Sullivan's hand, holding on maybe a little too long. Goodbye, doctor. Goodbye, Karin. Stay safe. She turned toward the trucks, clutching her bag and the envelope and trying not to cry. But she'd only taken a few steps when another voice called her name. Karin. Wait, she turned to see Robert, the guard who'd protected her from Koch, who'd watched over her for months, who'd become something like a friend in this strange place, jogging toward her with something in his hands. A heavy canvas duffel bag. He set it at her feet, breathing hard. Almost missed you, Karin looked at the bag, confused. What is this? Supplies. Robert unzipped it, showing her the contents. Medical supplies. Bandages, antiseptic, surgical tools, some antibiotics we could spare. Figured you might need them. Karin's hands flew to her mouth. Inside the bag were rolls and rolls of sterile bandages, bottles of iodine and alcohol, scissors and clamps and needles, real medicine, aspirin, sulfa drugs, even a few precious vials of penicillin. A fortune in wartime supplies, enough to save dozens of lives, maybe hundreds. I cannot take this, Karin whispered. This is too much. You need these for, your people need them more. Robert zipped the bag and hefted it back into her arms. It was heavy, but he made sure she could carry it. Go save some lives, sister, sister. The word hit Karin like a physical blow. Not prisoner, not enemy, not even nurse, sister. I do not know what to say, Karin managed through tears. Don't say anything. Just, Robert's voice got rough. Just make it mean something, okay? This whole awful war. Make it mean something by helping people. By being the change you want to see. Last call, the officer shouted. Trucks are leaving. Karin looked at Robert, this American soldier who'd given her his protection, his kindness, his supplies, and she knew she'd never see him again. Thank you, she said. For everything. Robert nodded, his eyes bright with emotion he was trying to hide. Go on now. Your people are waiting. Karin climbed into the truck, clutching the duffel bag to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world, because it was. As the convoy of trucks pulled away from Camp Aliceville, Karin looked back through the canvas opening. The camp was getting smaller in the distance. The green grass, the hospital where she'd learned that mercy wasn't weakness, the mess hall where she'd been treated like family, the barracks where she'd slept in a clean bed while her enemies protected her. The American flag still flew over the camp, stars and stripes rippling in the Alabama breeze. And for the first time in her life, Karin raised her hand, not in a Nazi salute, never again. Not in surrender, but in respect, in gratitude, in acknowledgement that she had learned something in this place that would change her forever. The enemy wasn't defined by nationality or uniform. The enemy was cruelty, hatred, the belief that some people mattered less than others, and the greatest victory wasn't won with bullets or bombs, it was won with kindness, with mercy, with the simple, radical act of treating every human being like they had value. The truck rumbled down the road toward the docks, toward the ships, toward Germany and whatever future waited there. Karin closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She would use these supplies to heal anyone who needed it, German or Allied, soldier or civilian, friend or former enemy. She would tell her story to anyone who would listen. She would make sure the world knew that in the darkest days of the war, in a prison camp in Alabama, American soldiers had shown her that humanity could survive even the worst evil. And she would never, ever forget the lesson that Koch taught her on that frozen day in the bunker. Warmth is stronger than hate. Kindness is braver than cruelty. And love, real love for all people, is the only thing worth fighting for. Karin returned to Germany in June 1945. Hamburg was rubble. Her childhood home was gone. But her mother and sister had survived, living in a basement with 12 other families. She unpacked the duffel bag that first night and cried when she saw the medical supplies again. Her mother asked where she got them. From the enemy, Karin said, and then she told her story. For the next 40 years, Karin worked as a nurse in Hamburg. She treated everyone who came to her clinic, rich and poor, German and foreign, friend and stranger. She never turned anyone away. She never forgot Dr. Sullivan's kindness. Never forgot Robert's protection. Never forgot that Christmas dinner when enemies became family. In 1985, at age 63, Karin wrote her memoir. She called it The Koch, and it became required reading in German schools, teaching children about the power of mercy in the midst of war. Researchers and historians sought her out, documenting her testimony for the archives so future generations would understand that even in humanity's darkest hour, individual acts of compassion could shine through. Her story was featured in documentaries about prisoner of war camps and the complexities of moral choices during wartime. She died in 1998, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still wearing a small American flag pin on her coat collar. A gift from Robert sent to her in 1946 with a letter that said simply, "Never forget who you are, sister, a healer, a bridge, a light in the darkness." And Karin never forgot. None of us should. Because the lesson of her story isn't about World War II. It's about now. It's about the choice we all face every day. Will we see enemies or will we see humans? Will we respond with cruelty or with kindness? Will we build walls or will we offer coats? Karin chose warmth, even when it was terrifying, even when her own people called her a traitor. Even when kindness made no sense at all, she chose warmth, and it changed everything. May we all be brave enough to do the same. If this story inspired you, if it made you believe in the power of human kindness even in the darkest times, please share it. Click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. These stories of courage and compassion deserve to be remembered and shared. Leave a comment below telling us how this story affected you. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these powerful, forgotten stories to light. Thank you for watching, and remember, in a world that often feels divided, we all have the power to be someone's coat.